I'm Dr. Scott Lyons, and you're watching or listening to The Gently Used Human. What is the true price for admission for laughter that moves you to tears? Well, my guest today, Margaret Cho, is not just a comedian. She's a force of nature in the world of entertainment and advocacy. A 5-time Grammy and Emmy nominee, Margaret's voice has blazed trails for underrepresented groups and reshaped the landscape for American comedy. In our conversation, we explore the curious, subversive edges of Margaret's comedy, where she addresses the absurdity of culture, life during the pandemic, her love for TikTok and reality shows, and even her fascination with pimple popping. We dive into how she navigates Asian hate through her humor, her journey of healing from addiction, and the transformative power of choice in finding a sense of belonging. So, are you ready to laugh, reflect, and maybe even squirm a little? Join me for a roller coaster ride of insight and revelations with the incomparable Margaret Cho. Here we go. Margaret Cho, welcome to The Gently Used Human. I mean, I don't even know where to begin. You are such a fucking icon.
Oh.
You are a total inspiration in my life. You are a radical, amazing comedian, actor, musician, advocate, entrepreneur, 5-time Grammy and Emmy nominee. No big deal. You're just all around fucking amazing. And thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you very much. I love that. That's so amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. I would love to start with a little story, a little gush story, and a thank you from the bottom of my heart. When I was in my early 20s, I took my dad to your show as a warm-up to coming out to him.
Mm-hmm.
And your show was so brilliant. He laughed, he cried. It was in Minnesota. And after the show, we took a walk, and I came out to him, and he was just in such a joyous mood that his response was, "Whatever you need, I'm here for you."
Oh, I love that. Well, I'm so glad. That's really fantastic.
Yeah. So I just want to say thank you. You've been truly such an inspiration in my life. Your comedy is genius. And I want to even talk about, like, my goodness, you've been in comedy for 40 years.
Yes.
That's an incredible journey. And I was wondering if you can talk us through, like, what's evolved in the world of comedy, both in the field of it and for yourself. Like, what's been your journey of evolution?
Well, I think because that's my cat too. She's going to get in on this. I think I really grew up in the industry and the art form. And so I've seen it go through a lot of changes, and I've gone through a lot of changes. And I think what's much more interesting is that nowadays comedians are taken a lot more seriously than they used to be. You know, there used to be sort of like this idea that comedy was really just sort of frivolous entertainment that was somewhat meaningless, yet necessary. You know, there were always a lot of appreciation for comedians, but at the same time, you didn't take what they were saying as seriously as you do now, where when you look at anything that happens in the media, we look to comedians first to comment on it, whatever that is. You know, and so that's the biggest change. Although there's been an element of that, but it was only certain people that we'd ask that of, like somebody like Lenny Bruce. You know, that it was rare that you would ask the opinions, or maybe somebody like Richard Pryor. And nowadays, it's really almost every comedian has to weigh in on social issues, or else we're avoiding it.
Yeah.
So I think it's valuable. We've become a lot more valuable. I appreciate the art form a lot more. I understand it more than I used to as a young person, but I understand life a lot more, I think, than I did as a young person. So those two go hand in hand.
What is it that you understand more about comedy and yourself as you're talking about?
I think that what is really important to understand about humor is that it's ultimately a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And so it's the search for hope. And when you can laugh about something, then you're really on your way to healing. So having a sense of humor is really a very adapted way of coping with trauma. And it's a way that we look towards like healing in our daily life. So I think it's really valuable, and I think it's really meaningful. So I always really am grateful that I have the ability to do it. Also, not just for my work, but just in my life.
Yeah. Was your acts or what you created part of your own healing process, or was it more dedicated towards other people's healing process?
I think it was really not conscious. Like it was never really conscious or geared towards looking for healing. Not until a little bit later, when I started to do longer shows, when I was sort of outside of doing club shows and more doing theater shows, and then doing sort of longer extended performances. And then I was looking towards, like in the 90s, I was really talking about healing from eating disorders, healing from alcoholism and drug addiction, healing from feeling of not belonging, healing from being an outsider within my industry as an Asian American queer woman. So those are things that were very conscious, looking towards talking about stories of healing, making sense of healing in the 90s. Nowadays, it's a little bit more complicated. Nowadays, it's talking about aging, talking about menopause. Still in the realm of being a queer Asian American woman, which that hasn't changed. Yeah. But what has changed is my age. What has changed are the sort of demons that I'm fighting that are not as obvious.
Yeah.
You know, when you're dealing with active alcoholism, active drug addiction, active eating disorders, those are very obvious foes.
Yeah.
That you have to face. But in old age, I'm not that old, but I'm the youngest an old person can be. That's 55. So that's like really an achievement. When you get to that point where you have sort of arsenal of things to whip out when you need to fight these very old foes, then other things come, like aging, like creaky body, mental health, things like that. That's a very real thing.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember the story you told in Northampton, Massachusetts years ago. And it was about driving in LA traffic and having to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And by the way, I thought of you about 6 months ago when I was stuck in traffic and had to go to the bathroom so bad. And I was like, what would Margaret Cho do?
The worst. The worst. The worst. It's so humbling and so human. And it's a very real thing. And it reminds you of how human we really are. But it's so funny too. Whenever we have that, it's really funny.
Yeah. I mean, and this is such a great example of how you've spent so many years letting people into your life, letting people into like the most annihilating and intense stories. And I saw the other day you had even people into your like MTV Cribs in your house, which is a fun episode to watch. And I'm wondering, like, what are your boundaries between what's public and what's private?
I think that you have to have boundaries that are set for you. Like, to me, it's not a problem to let people into my home. I've shot a lot of content in my house. I've had really a very familiar kind of like that. To me is not a boundary crossing thing. You know, my boundaries are more solid when it comes to just interpersonal relationships or people that I'm like intimate with and that kind of stuff. That's where it becomes much more defined, like what I need to do. Like, I think also for me, at this time in my life, at least for this moment, I think that in a sexually intimate relationship that is like somebody that I live with is really real violation of boundaries. Yeah. I have sex and I have intimacy and I have romance, but all those things are really compartmentalized and like very rigid. I don't want to live with anybody I'm having sex with. That's my solid boundary for right now. So everybody that lives here is really, it's platonic, even except or unless it's animal, then it's very all encompassing love. But it's really like, to me, that's never worked. You know, and intimacy and romance and sex all in the once and living together, it's really, you know, it's a disaster. So I now have created boundaries in my life where we're intimate, we're sexual, we're romantic, we live in different places, and it really works. I don't know why, but it works.
I can totally respect that. I have a lot of friends who've been together 30, 40 years, separate places. And
It's so
really
nice.
works. It's so nice to have a little space, that interdependency with space.
I think it's really beautiful. I mean, I know that it's unusual. People sort of always think, oh, well, you're going to grow old alone. I'm like, that's the point. That's the best part. That's what I'm going for. You're going to die alone. Yeah. That's why if I had a choice in dying, which, nobody does really, I think I would rather do it by myself. I think that seems to me the right thing, but it's really hard on people in my life who cannot imagine, what it would be like to not be partnered. Like my parents really hate it. Everybody in my family hates it. Also, like a lot of people in my life are just like, well, you should be seeing somebody, you should, and it's a very scary thing for people to look at somebody who's very happy alone. And the truth is I'm not alone. I'm actually very social and very busy, but I do have a nice place, as is shown in Cribs, to come back to on my own, which is really nice.
That's great. And in terms of how the boundaries work in relation to what gets brought on stage and what doesn't in your life, how do you define that?
I think that if it is about speaking of a shared experience with somebody else, then I've actually gone and asked the person, I'm going to talk about this. Is that a problem for you? Also, if there's not an ability to do that, which sometimes there's not, then you kind of work around. It's a workaround where you're not calling them out. Like I'm not into that aspect of exposing people or whatever. That's not my point of view. I just want to talk about what's happened to me. So the amount of damage control I can do around that is the best. I think that's really fair. And over time, actually, that's actually worked out very well. I realized, oh, okay, well, I can't talk about this. If I'm talking about my side of the story, then it's all of it's fair game.
Has that been a lesson you've learned of oops, I crossed a line of sharing too much from my own personal life or sharing something from someone else's?
Yeah, I think it's really because people have different levels of comfort around what they want out there, or things that are said. And, I had this stupid story. This is an example. I was dating somebody and I had a joke about how I was really badly constipated. So in order to have anal sex, you would have to go in my asshole and pull out every piece of shit like a stone and then toss them like it was the I Ching. And I told this story in my comedy, and the person, he was really upset. He cried.
What?
He cried. And I'm like, bitch, I'm talking about my shit.
Literally.
Bitch, this has nothing to do with you. He cried. And it's like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Why are you crying? But obviously that wasn't the person for me. But it's just that's an example of somebody who felt like his boundaries were crossed. As I was talking about something that is meant to, and it's not a joke about you. It's a joke about the I Ching. So
it's a good fucking joke at that.
It's a good joke. So it's like, why are you crying? It's like that Jonathan Venice. Why are you crying? No, it's very, he's also my good friend. Yeah. Jonathan has taught me a lot also about telling the story. I taught Jonathan about telling the story, and then Jonathan, now they teach me about telling the story.
What was it that you taught them and what they taught you?
Well, Jonathan, I think, taught me how to appreciate the story, because every time I would see them and we would talk, they would say, I love that story. I love that story. And everything, when they said that made me realize everything is a story that you could love, that you could appreciate. And so I actually forced Jonathan to do stand-up comedy. So now they're a very accomplished stand-up comedian. But they used to do my hair all those years ago. And so then I made them come with me to shows, and I forced them to do comedy, which is great. So I'm very pleased at how things have turned out for them.
Amazing.
But it's really beautiful. So yeah, it's like, tell the story. That's my thing. And I also want to be aware of other people's feelings. But people often have wildly inappropriate ideas of what's their story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's also like this person that I was seeing who was upset about the I Ching, like that's not their story.
No.
You know, but for some reason he took ownership of that story. So it was very weird.
Yeah, that really talks about a certain, like a boundary crossing in terms of an enmeshment. Yeah.
That's another reason why I think that for me, at least at this time, that a romantic relationship and a sexual relationship and an intimate, like, living together is just overwhelming.
Yeah, I get it. She definitely wants an appearance on the show. Can you introduce her?
This is...
Yeah, whoa.
This is Lucia Katerina Lawler. She's named after... Well, Lucia is light, clear light. Katerina is clear light. So Lucia... it's just a beautiful name, I think. And then Katerina, a little bit also Catherine Deneuve, who is my favorite beauty. And then Lawler is my best friend who passed away. She died in 2018. She was my very best friend who I grew up with, and she was always better than me in every aspect. She was prettier than me, smarter than me, funnier than me, better actor than me, better comedian than me, better singer than me. And now she's deader than me. So... You know what, bitch? You won. And but she's really, I miss her a lot. And so every time I get to see her again in Lucia, Lawler, Miss Lawler.
I want to take a moment to give a loud shout out to the Embody Lab, which is one of the most incredible resources for body-based and somatic therapies. This show is all about healing, and the Embody Lab does exactly that. Whether you're on your own journey of transformation and discovery, or enhancing your skill sets in your career as like a coach or a therapist, a body worker, or really any career where you are supporting other gently used humans, the Embody Lab is your place for deep, inspiring, and impactful workshops, certificates, masterclasses, and an incredible community of like-minded folks. I love the Embody Lab, and so do so many other people that call it a platform to come home to over and over again. The Embody Lab is giving my listeners an exclusive offer, a one-time 10% off code to enhance your embodied well-being. All you have to do is go to theembodylab.com and use the code GentlyUse10 at checkout. Margaret, have you ever felt like a joke that you've shared has gone too far? From your own personal perspective, because other people have their perspective.
I don't know, because I've never felt like it was too far, because I have very different views about what I am comfortable sharing. Like, I'm kind of comfortable sharing anything. Yeah. And it's not, because I also look at it as like, my life is a evolving work of art. And there are different eras that you go through, and there are things that you would do then and not do now. And I've gone through so much therapy and done so much work on my mental health and my sobriety and things like that. So I don't think anything is too far. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm like, again, like something like the I Ching story, whatever. Those are examples of people getting really upset about like things that don't make sense to me. Because I'm open, but I'm also, when you are that open, that's also a subterfuge, because it's like I decide what you get to see. Because I'm so incredibly forthright about things that I'm saying, that I'm also creating the mythology for you to believe in. And because I'm so open, quote unquote, open about it, you're not going to question me.
Yeah.
It's another way of being closed off is being very forthcoming about your truth.
Gosh, say more, because
Yeah.
that's brilliant. I never thought about it that way.
That's another way of deciding what people think about you. Is by this self-incriminating confessional style of communication that is really controlling, because you're controlling the narrative of what people think and believe about who you are and what you're doing. And so through that, you can act all kind of, crazy manipulation behind it.
Wow. Is that what you discovered in therapy?
That, and with writing, and, really and I lie to myself about who I am. It's like a very tricky thing, when you realize the complexity of being and yourself. And like over time, you look through your life and you see all the things that you've done and you go, I was like lying to myself about so much stuff. So it's really interesting. But yeah, I think that through therapy, through writing, through like different kinds of 12-step things, through healing modalities, all that, like you really discover what it's all about.
Is the line, did it show up in the ways or in the material of your stories?
The lying is really more like how I feel about something, how I felt about certain things, how I felt about things, like lying about like really intimate things, like sex, like what was pleasurable, lying about things that I thought were meaningful and sexually like invigorating and exciting, like I didn't like at all. And I remember I went through this phase of like being very adventurous, and I still am pretty adventurous, but then I would be in these sexual situations where I was like, I don't even know why I'm doing this. Like this guy in North Hollywood, he is nice. I don't know what North Hollywood has to do with it, but he was really into like putting hand sanitizer on my leg and setting it on fire. And that was like sexual. And I'm like, how is this sexual? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm like, what? And it wasn't abusive. It wasn't like, this was like totally consensual. Totally like, I'm fine. I'm here for this. But then I'm like, we're doing it. And I'm like, what? What? And I was like thinking about this actually the other day, like, why did I do that? And it was like lying to myself because I wanted to, Madonna's sex book had just come out. I was trying to figure out like I want to be adventurous. I want to do things that are like, part of this narrative of like, I'm just wild. But then you're like, what am I doing here? Why is this? It's not exciting to me. I can't figure out what the thread of like sexuality is to get to it. I don't know. So part of like this idea of adventure, and I also know like, well, there's things that I can get into. Like I can get into a power exchange. I can get into sensation play. But at the same time, I'm also, some things make me really lost. And then I realize, oh, I'm totally lying about this, that I don't have a connection to this.
Yeah. How long did it take you to start to say no or not interested?
Well, when I was in it, I was like really confused. And then when I got out of it, and then I realized, this isn't for me. But then I also really liked all of that group of friends. And so they were really, to me, very fun. And I enjoyed the idea of it. And I still really love BDSM communities. I still really love the art form. And I still really, that is an art form, all of the different things that they do. And I still consider myself a member of that community. And while I have to really specifically pick and choose what things I identify with and engage in.
Yeah. It makes me think of like, sometimes we like the idea of something, but then our body says no.
Yeah,
or there's
totally.
like that dissonance. Or sometimes, I don't know, I found this sometimes of like, I liked it for the story of it.
Absolutely. And those things are totally valid.
Yeah.
Those things are totally valid. You can like something because of the added mythology it gives to you for your personal odyssey.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Those things are really important, but does it actually really have a visceral reaction where you want to engage in it? No.
No. I remember a story you told, and I can't remember what tour this was, maybe Margaret Cho, was it? Where you talked about being in a chair with a madam and she was gonna she had a giant leather strap on. Was that which?
Yeah, that was probably Notorious. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember you saying you were all into it, and then you unzipped the mask, and you're like, no.
Yeah. No, I mean, you just kind of go, what's going on? That's a funny thing. When BDSM doesn't work and the spell is broken, it's so disappointing.
Yeah.
It's so disappointing. So, how do you keep the spell going? Well, you only engage in things that are erotic to you. And so that takes a lot of exploration. That takes a lot of discussion and talking. And sometimes even that discussion and talking can really break the spell. So it's very elusive. But when you can do it, it's really magic.
Yeah. Extending beyond sort of a norm, breaking a norm, which brings me to a subject matter which I want to talk to you about, which is your style of comedy. Because how would you describe it? I know how I would describe it from getting so many opportunities to receive it, but I'm so curious how you would define it or describe it. I know that it's evolved, but
it's evolved. It's really it's self-exploration that is a questioning and incriminating, but also you're not afraid to glorify yourself too a little bit, because it's fun. So it's about looking through adult life with a childlike innocence that allows you to play with, discovery, playing with this idea, also questioning what's happening. So for me, it's going into it very much in a way that's unafraid of incrimination, but also unafraid of discovery. So that to me is really fun. I have a good time with comedy because I'm still sort of trying to discover what it is and trying to master it too and have a good time. I'm not so interested in being the authority. I think certain comedians are very interested. It's very male too, where they want to be the authority of things. So these are guys who I think that's their brand. That's the guys that everybody checks in on them if anything happens. Everybody wants to know what they have to say.
They're the ones teaching a master class on comedy.
Yeah, I'm not interested in that because I also I'm not the authority. I don't know. I'm just trying to make sense of it. And so that's what I think I do.
I think that's a brilliant description. Can I add some of what I experienced from you over so many years? Which is thought-provoking as all hell.
Thank you.
And subversive. Pushing people's comfort zone. Do you know the phrase building people's discomfort tolerance?
Yes.
It's a stress or resilience technique. And one of the things I felt you did from my experience watching for so many years was oh, now I'm a little more comfortable. Now I'm even more comfortable now. And that, I guess that's the idea of subversive is to challenge things and make people think about it and expand their comfort in navigating it. Racism, homophobia.
Yeah.
I don't remember so many comedians talking about it the way that you have.
No, that's good. Thank you.
And I'm just curious, what's that journey like to push the subversive envelope?
I don't do it that consciously. So it's never oh, I'm going to talk about this and challenge this. It's never that. It's just that I'm genuinely curious. What does this mean? And why is this something that we're always thinking about? And so to me, it's more about it's just curious to me, but it's never a way because I want to, again, be the authority.
Yeah.
On a topic or be the be all end all of something. It's more just I'm curious.
That makes sense. I appreciate that it's not intentionally going in as a subversive whipping or a cracking open.
No.
But I love that it's actually emerging from your curiosity and in the curiosity or the willingness to step into the territories maybe people don't get curious about or talk about their curiosity in, that's the opening of the egg, so to speak.
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
I love that because there's something interesting too about how the evolution of subversive humor works or which is like once you talk about it, it's not as subversive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or, I mean, things remain subversive, but less and less. And then
Yes.
how do you keep working in that way? But I really hear it's actually coming from a realm of curiosity
Yeah.
I love that. So I would love to hear about your new show, Live and Live It. Like, can you tell us about the inspiration of it? What's in it? What we can expect?
Well, it comes out of like the discovery of, oh, I've never stayed home for 35 years. So this is really interesting to actually have had to stay home during the pandemic. Like I never stayed home. I didn't know how to. There were like so many rooms in my house that I didn't even go into because I was never home. And I never quite unpacked my bags. Like it was weird. Like I just was such a touring comedian for all of my adult life and some of my teens that I didn't know how to have a home life. And then, so doing that, like staying at home, kind of more understanding who I was as a homebody and really loving that. And then from that perspective, looking at the world completely go crazy with the pandemic. And the thing that makes me the most angry of like the blaming of drag queens for the harming children, which made me so mad. And so that's ridiculous. The livid part of like being so furious about that. And then being furious about having rights to abortion taken away. Because abortion is something that I was really like very, very strongly in favor of like pro-choice, but you know, rights of our own bodies. So just being angry about that and wanting to talk about that in my comedy, really explore that. That's where people sometimes get uncomfortable. So I talk a lot about abortion in my show and my experiences with it. And some, you know, even if you're pro-choice, there is a level of like polite society that goes, okay, well, you can talk about it, but don't talk about it too much.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where I think where I would say there's resistance because yes, if you're pro-choice, that's really an established important thing. But again, we don't want to hear the details, which I'm very much is about the details.
Yeah.
You know, so that's where I think people get uncomfortable and scared.
Yeah.
But also I'm not willing to turn away from that. You know, I think it's really important to acknowledge, like, we have to allow people to do what they want with their bodies. That's very, very important. So there's that. There's talking about how the pandemic really affected the relationship that Asian Americans have in society to society. So there's a lot about that. So there's so much about kind of coming to realize that the world has gone nuts. Maybe I've gotten sort of like really nuts too with it and like angry. So, you know, it's being angry, but also being very deliberate and lyrical about that anger. And so that's my contribution.
Lyrical in what way?
Lyrical, like astute and like kind of trying to make sense of like, well, you know what? Christians are so mad about drag queens, but Jesus himself is wearing a full-length gown from Chico's. It's a duster and a gown, part of the Golden Girls collection. Hashtag thank you for being a friend. So it's like, what the, you know, and like the whole, like also the, you know, the Christianity in general is the most bizarre BDSM religion where you're like looking to a lot of the iconography that's totally familiar at Folsom Street Fair. Like what? And you're calling us perverse? Like, please, you know, like, look, like it's not drag queens that are harming children. It's church that harms children. And if you really cared about kids, you would get rid of guns because that's doing the most harm to children. And so it's just like looking at, to me, it's very obvious the hypocrisy that exists within the right wing and the conservatives. The creepiness of somebody like the new Speaker of the House who shares his porn sites that he goes to with his son. Like that to me is so like creepy, is that your accountability for your porn viewing is your accountability partner is your son. That's like the creepiest, weirdest thing. Like you're sharing that with your kids. Like that's creepy. So don't be coming for like the gay community as being groomers when you yourself, it's coming from inside the house, the speaker of the house.
Yeah.
So it's like very nuts.
I mean, I see that as such like the value of the platform of comedy too. Is like you get to be an observer to the absurdity of our culture, of the world, and have space to share that absurdity in ways like we get to go, oh my gosh, oh yeah, I never even thought about that. I never got a chance to really unpack that in the way that you do that.
Yes. So that's what I'm trying to do, like, is really connect those things and speak about that with anger that has a lilting quality, a lyrical quality, alliteration, have fun with it.
Yeah. So what did you do during the pandemic? Like, were you writing? Were you making music? Were you...
Both. I think, yeah, both.
All the above?
All of that, I was making music. I still make music. I still have a lot to do in that realm that I need to finish up. So that there's that. I built a lot of wonderful things for my cats. I had a very active home life. I made a lot of bread. I made a lot of pizza, which is nice. So yeah, I established myself as a homebody, which I also really love. And so now that's a big aspect of my life that I don't want to change. And so my touring has changed too. Like I don't go out for long periods of time. I am back and forth. And so I have a very active home life, which I'm very grateful for.
Nice. Did you do any performing on like Zoom or any of that? How did that go?
That was good. It was really good. And that was a very different way of performance and a different way of communicating, which I love too. So that's great, and I got to really enjoy things like TikTok, which very special. I love TikTok. I love, and that also has given rise to another addiction. I have a pretty severe phone addiction, which is really embarrassing, which I don't like.
What's embarrassing about it?
Because I love it.
Oh,
I love my phone. I love TikTok. I love the way that the algorithm really caters to every aspect of you. And like you kind of discover more about what you like. I realize I just like cooking and people pulling out earwax. It's so gross, but I can't stop.
When did you discover that?
Just by looking at recently, at TikTok. I can't believe how much the algorithm is telling me you really like to watch people pull stuff out of their ear, and I can't deny it.
What about other orifices? Is it just to the ear?
I think there's a little bit of pimple popping, but I always I go right to the ear for some reason.
Wow.
The pimple popping I can get real into, and I love Sandra. Like she's a friend of mine. She's a great doctor. She does great stuff. I realize so much of that too is about class. Like it's about class and how people who don't have the money aren't going to question things that happen with their body. And that it's like very depressing too. Like how we'll ignore those things until it becomes a real crisis. And so that, like a lot of pimple popping, the show, it really is a study about class and awareness about class.
I didn't even know there was a show. There's like a TV show or like a
Dr. Pimple Popper. It's like got like 15 seasons. I mean, it's got almost more seasons than like Dancing with the Stars. It's like one of the most popular reality franchises. It's almost as popular as something like 90 Day Fiancé.
What?
Which is also an obsession of mine too, which is, that's a weird one where you can really go deep.
What do you think the psychology is that people are so interested in watching pimple popping?
That has a lot. It's a lot to do with class. It's a lot to do with class-based bias. How we have this bias over people like that are of a certain class. Like it's very interesting. So but ear cleaning, it's so gross and it really freaks me out. I have one of those ear things too with like a camera that you can like, and I start doing it and I'm like, oh, I can't even look. I can't. It's so horrible.
That shocks me a little bit, I have to say, that's what grosses you out from some of the stories I've heard you tell on a stage.
But it's, I know, it's the ear stuff that really freaks me out. I don't know why. That's the one part that I'm like, I can't, but I can. I get real curious.
Wow. This show is also brought to you by the absolutely stunning and powerful tools of transformation that are created by Omala. Oof, even the name Omala transports you to a place of flow and vitality. These are some of my favorite products ever. They have an amazing color-changing yoga mat that responds to your temperature and presence and reflects back your posture in real time. There's this incredible smelling skin balm candle that heats up to activate all the essential oils and vitamins that your skin has been craving. I mean, look, if I could live in a giant bath of this candle, I would 100% do it. They also have these journals that lead you into profound insight, and then you get to plant those journals to create a stunning flower garden. What? I mean, if that's not deep and inventive, I don't know what is. If you're someone who desires to live a luxurious flow of life and who believes in transformative wellness, then you have to check out Omala. Omala is giving my listeners an exclusive discount to treat yourself to something that is as special as you, boo. All you have to do is go to omala.com, that's OMALA.com, and use the code DrScott10 at checkout. And a portion of every purchase goes to an incredible charity. You got this. I mean, it's always interesting what we're comfortable with and what grosses us out. Like when I was in school and had to do cadaver labs, I would take it was behind a glass wall, but I would take my dinner because that was the only time I had and nobody else was eating. I was like, it just doesn't gross me out.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting. I mean, that is sort of like that. You always have that in like maybe a movie or a TV show that's like a true crime thing. There's always the cop that's eating.
Yeah.
When they're looking at the crime scene.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah.
Minus the cop.
When you're used to it, you don't connect the idea of like eating as being like with the body or whatever. I worked with cadavers briefly. When I was in nursing school. I was in nursing school for like one semester. I was not good at it. And I was like, it was terrible. I was really not good. I dropped out. Yeah. But I did work with cadavers briefly. And it wasn't behind glass. We were actually just and we had old specimens. So they were very like.
Smelly.
So yeah, very smelly, like formaldehyde. The chemical smell really got to me.
Oh.
Not the body. The body was so. I mean, they were just like kind of, and also they wrapped the faces so you couldn't, and they didn't have skin. So you didn't have a sense of like, where the skin was there, but it was like it was segmented so you could see all of the structures underneath the skin. So it didn't seem like a person.
No, there's a sort of depersonalization of it that happens.
That's pretty deep. That was like, oh, this doesn't freak me out. It didn't scare me or. Yeah. It was just kind of like, oh, we're using these specimens to figure out. And it was more just like, oh, this is going to be so hard to identify all of these parts for the test. That was more the anxiety rather than, oh, this is the human body.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, that smell.
It's like glue.
Yeah.
But that's not the death smell. Death.
No.
That's not. It's so far removed from death because it's like, it's more just like the lab smell. That would bother me. But I've never smelled the smell of decomposition of a body.
Yeah. I haven't either. So you went to nursing school, but you were already doing comedy at that time, right? Because you started in your teens.
Yes.
And then did you realize maybe nursing wasn't your jam?
It wasn't. It was so gross. It just was like, I mean, it's so much work.
It's so much work.
It's so much work that I just was too lazy. Yeah. I was too lazy. I couldn't do it. I couldn't even do the school. It was too lazy. I thought briefly, I'll go and be a mortuary tech. Oh, wow. So I applied for financial aid at Mortuary Arts School in San Francisco, and then then comedy started to really take off. So there was no need for that. But that would have been a cool job, I thought.
Yeah. I was going to say, is that when comedy started to roll for you? Is like, it was either mortuary work or comedy.
Yeah, because I like the idea of like makeup and like reconstructing, making people look good. That to me was interesting, the aspect of it, like creating faces to like put on for their funerals and stuff. Like to me, that was like appealing. Not the grief and all that stuff that didn't appeal to me, but like to me, like, to present the body, creatively, like those things were interesting.
Always a creative.
Yes. Yes.
I want to go back for a moment and talk about a few more details of your upcoming show, which is really exciting. And I'm curious, one of the aspects you talked about is like post-COVID and the influx of like Asian hate. And I'm curious how you navigate that through the realm of comedy. Like, how do you?
It's really scary. Well, a lot of it had to do with like so much fear that I had around my parents who are in their 80s and talking to them about the racism that they might incur in the street and how unaffected they were, because my parents and Asian Americans of that age have dealt with so much trauma throughout their lives that this phase of Asian hate was nothing. That they were like really very unfazed. They're like, well, if you grew up in the wars that we saw and the tremendous racism that we dealt with in the 60s coming to America, this ain't shit. So it really taught me a lot. And so I talk about that in the show. I talk about how I was just so afraid of it and how I also experienced some things happening, that it was really scary in the moment as well. So
can you share more about that?
Yeah, I was in Florida and I was walking this little girl in the street and I came across a convoy of about 50 semi-trucks who were all flying the no Kung flu, no China virus. And they tried to run me over like Mad Max, and it was so scary. And I'm like trying to film it while it's happening. It's really hard to film a hate crime in progress, which I discovered.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Very terrifying. And I was like, should I call the police? I don't know. I didn't get physically hurt, but I was so traumatized. So it was like one of those things like, where am I victimized here? I don't know if the police are going to help. What helps? The only thing that helps is telling the story.
Yeah.
So that's what I come away with, being like this. It's like I was a victim of a hate crime, but I wasn't really hurt. I wasn't physically hurt.
Yeah.
So where is my damage? Like, and then so that's really what I'm navigating in my show is like, when am I valid to like complain about this? Well, I think in comedy, yes. This is where I can talk about that trauma as a trauma.
Yeah. Well, and, not only is it the experience itself, but then there's the generational trauma that gets triggered.
Yes.
And that's real.
Yeah. And that's real. That's like a very real thing. And then, like to try to talk about it and like, how do we process it? Well, to me, like comedy's been the best way.
Yeah.
So that's a way for me to engage in this idea of like, it's a hate crime, but it only really traumatized me just a little bit. So I got a little sunburn from it. It's like a little, like how many degrees of it, like, how racism affects us, like how bad is like by degrees. And so like talking about it in that way has been the best way, like in my comedy to make sense of it.
Have other people reached out to you and said like, just thank you for talking about it in a way that is, again, through comedy, healing for them?
Yeah, people, definitely. It's great because it also makes people recognize, these things of like, I allow these microaggressions when they become even more obvious.
Yeah.
And then how do I cope with it? And then so that's been really great. People talking about, I didn't even realize that that's something that I felt. That's cool.
That's amazing that you're able to offer so many people that those opportunities for healing through your curiosity, through your play, through your humor, through your lividness.
That's nice.
I'd like to just kind of wrap it up with talking. One of the things you talked about, and I know I've read about some stuff, and you mentioned it here, was around the addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I was hoping you could talk to us about like your own healing process through that, where your work and your creativity also was a part of that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I think like that. I mean, that's the thing is I've dealt with alcoholism and some form of addiction for my entire adult life. And so, I've been sober for quite a few years now, but I have to really work on it. Like, and I do a lot of, my main modality of healing there is meditation. So I have a very strong meditation practice. It's a big part of my day, every day. It's something that I've really worked on, and that's really hard. It's at that I'm doing that, and then I do a lot of physical activity. I have a lot of animals, and so that's a great thing.
I saw the cat casino.
Yeah, it's such a nice cat casino. They are the best. But working on my sobriety is a big part of my life, and it's something that is my work is an adjunct, like it's a side journey. My main job ultimately, I think, is my sobriety, because that's sort of what it has to be. And then all the other avenues are just ways for me to have fun. Yeah, I work on it. I really try to do the best that I can, because I just don't want to fall back into it. It's hard. And that's like the main job, like all through my life. It's like, and it has nothing to do really with my success as an artist or not success as an artist. I think it's like so way too easy to say, oh, I fell into addiction because I was depressed about my career and I couldn't handle the fame, or I didn't get the fame, or I was too famous, or whatever. Like it's almost too easy to say that. That's actually not true. The thing is that I was beset by my addictive personality my whole life. And so that's been my main problem throughout everything. My main foe is my addictive nature. And so that's like something that I've had to cope with. Everything else really was just a detail, but I've had to fight addiction all throughout. And now I think I feel like I've had the solution, which is a strong meditation practice, a strong mental health, mental hygiene. So it works out.
Are you of the school, like there's a whole rising theory and philosophy that like that addiction has a lot to do with the absence of belonging?
Yes.
Because I heard you mention that in the beginning of like, that's been part of your healing journey too, is like the sense of belonging or not belonging.
Right. So much of it is about, it's fixated on not belonging or not being enough. Now, all that sort of everything is not enough. And I like to look at like autobiographies of people who suffer from addiction. Like to me, that's really, it's almost it's like the most like hardcore that you can get with understanding the disease of it is just from somebody who suffers. Like I don't know if it was helpful to him, but I really enjoyed Matthew Perry's autobiography. I thought it was really incredibly vivid of a description of what it was like to suffer from the disease of alcoholism. So astute and so smart. And again, somebody who had everything, yet it wasn't enough. So, and then you realize when you read books like that, you go, oh, well, that the myth of not being enough, nothing is enough. It truly is a myth, because if anybody was enough, it was him, really, to have all the things that, we think of success, yet not enough.
It's that external enoughness, but something still that the void within still hasn't been filled back up by like what's been truly missing, which is often ourselves.
Right. It's very sad and very tough. And so I think that books like that are really helpful, in understanding what it is. And I'm really, I'm very saddened by his story, but I found that it was really illuminating to look at what he was writing about and talk about.
Yeah, it's devastating. What has been some of your main moments or tools in addition to meditation, towards that sense of belonging?
I think it's that I had an understanding that I can decide whether I belong or not. That it's my decision. It's up to you. And you don't have to belong if you don't want to.
Yeah.
And that it's totally okay not to, but that these are all just personal choices that we make. That being enough is a choice, that you can choose to be enough, that it's all that. And so that is very empowering, and it's very simple, but it's hard to implement.
Yeah, it is simple and hard to implement. And the agency of recognizing that we can step into belonging or step out and feeling that embodied sense of agency is so powerful. It's
really powerful, but it's taken a lifetime for me to actually start to use it, which is really, but I do, which is good.
Yeah, amazing. Margaret, thank you for being such an incredible inspiration and being such a wonder and such an important figure and icon in this world.
Thank you.
Thank you for being on The Gently Used Human. And I hope everyone who's listening will join me in seeing Margaret's new show, Live and Livid. And it doesn't matter where you are, go on to her website, find where it is, and fill it up and laugh your ass off and heal.
I love it.
Love it. Thank you, Margaret, so much.
Thank you.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for listening to the Gently Used Human podcast with Dr. Scott Lyons and friends. Visit gentlyused.com for fun extras, including submitting your questions for advice from a Midwestern mom. And don't forget to spill the tea and gossip about the show with all your friends and frenemies. And you know what? Show us some love by giving us 5 stars and leaving a review in your favorite apps. This helps us connect with all the other gently used humans out there. Oh, and by the way, you look fierce today.